We've got Ariel on the phone now. Ariel, are you back from Vegas?
Yes, I had nachos in my mouth. Sorry about that. I wasn't expecting you to come to me so soon.
Oh, listen, do you want to finish the nachos and call us back?
No. It was mid question. I was like, oh no, this is horrible.
Did you make nachos in the oven or just nachos in salsa? You're just dipping them in salsa?
Well, if you must know, I ordered them yesterday. Now they're like day-old nachos, so they're very soggy. They're not very good. It's not a very glamorous life that I lead here.
What? Wait. You ordered nachos a day ago and you're still eating the nachos? Ariel, you have this fantastic new gig with ESPN. Everything's going great for you. The days of day-old nachos, those are over for you.
You think so? I don't know. I have 3 children. There's not much time to make anything, so I just have to do what I can, you know what I mean?
I understand. Hey, congratulations on the new ESPN deal. Have things changed for you? I didn't realize. I was watching the pay-per-view over the weekend, and I saw that FS1 still has the post-fight show. So the new ESPN deal kicks in the new year. Is that correct?
That's correct. It kicks in 2019, January 1st to be exact. Now, when you say have things changed, what are you referring to?
Well, I mean, You did some stuff with us at Fox. We were lucky enough to have you, working with ESPN. You've already kind of started doing stuff. You've got your show, your podcast on.
New set looks great.
New set looks fantastic. Big differences between the two companies that you notice?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the first one, if I'm being honest, is I just feel a lot more support at ESPN.
Been there.
Working at Fox was a learning experience. And I met some great people. My good man, Zeus, who I think you guys know.
Oh, yeah.
Love that guy.
What a guy.
Was still one of my favorite people in the world till this day. And so there were some experiences that I'll never forget. But overall, I would be lying if I said that it was a positive experience. It certainly ended on a very sour note. And I wasn't sure. There's not that many opportunities when you're covering MMA to be on TV. And so for this opportunity to come about, and then for me to sign before they even had a deal with the UFC, and now they're going to be the broadcast home of the UFC, is kind of surreal. Like, I didn't plan this. People thought that I planned this and that I was trying to recreate the Fox job. I didn't plan this at all. And so once they let go of me for reasons that had nothing to do with me, I didn't do anything wrong. It was Dana telling Fox to get rid of me. It was a bummer. You have a dream, and then that dream is gone. So I'm very thankful that ESPN has given me this opportunity. That they're very loyal. They have my back, and thus far I've met some really great people. I've only been there a little less than 4 months, but thus far I can't complain.
Can you imagine, Ariel, like Gary Bettman going to Stu Johnston, the president of TSN, and saying, "You know what? I don't like what Bob McKenzie's reporting about this league. I want him out of there." It's actually amazing to think that actually happened.
Well, what's more amazing? I mean, I'm not amazed that he would make the suggestion or throw out the idea. I'm amazed at how quickly they jumped. He said jump, they said how high, and I mean, I worked for them for 5 years, and I got a 2-minute phone call, and that was it.
Yeah.
To give you to let you know how weird that is. I was supposed to work for them last summer at Showtime, and the president, Steven Espinoza, asked me to meet with him. And, I met with him an hour before we were supposed to do a show from the Staples Center, and he said, I hate to say this to you, but, Dana created a big stink, and you can't work for us. We're kind of partners. And, I was very upset. I had just flown cross-country and all this stuff. But what, stood out for me the most and what meant the most to me was the fact that this guy, who I'd technically not worked for a second yet, I was just about to, actually took the time to meet with me face-to-face and was, very compassionate, and I didn't get anything like that from Fox. So that's kind of highlighted how sort of sour the experience ended for me.
That's
but
unfortunate.
When all that came out, the outpouring that you received online, that must have felt good.
Yes. I mean, if I'm being honest, I'd rather not go through it. But yes, the fans have always had my back, and it's funny because when I went to ESPN, that's a big change for people. There's differences, right? And I was at my previous job, so I had an internet job and a TV job. The TV job was Fox for many years, but I also worked for Vox Media, VOX, for 9 years. And
they got really used to the same coverage, and the coverage was delivered to them in the same way, and it was all free and international, and now things are a little different. And the fans got really mad, and I'm the kind of person who feels very guilty about that because the fans have always had my back. And, so that's been a bit of a transition for me because, I see people writing like, Canadians, I can't get you on ESPN, and sometimes it's geo-blocked and things like that, and that breaks my heart because I feel like I actually work for the people. At the end of the day, because they have helped me so much and they've had my back through thick and thin, and I've put them through a lot, there's no doubt about it. I feel guilty about that stuff, but I'm confident over time that, this will be a good move for everyone.
Okay, let's dive into McGregor and Khabib. Is the UFC and Dana, are they really that upset about what occurred at the end?
Look, I don't think that they wanted that to happen, and I think that they took all the necessary precautions to avoid something like that happening. But the whole routine afterward, the sad dad routine, I'm disappointed, all that stuff, I have a hard time buying it because in April we said this is the most disgusting thing in the history of the sport and all this stuff, and then 2 days later that stance softened, and then it was used to sell the fight.
Yeah.
So I'm just having a hard time, look, in the moment, as I'm watching it, I'm in the arena. It's hard to watch. It's somewhat frightening. It reminded me of Andrew Galata versus Riddick Bowe, that famous boxing match where chairs were being thrown. It is a scary thing, and I know how deeply personal this feud is. And I will admit also it's somewhat heartbreaking because I love the sport of MMA, and I know that so many people were watching, new fans, the eyes of the sports world were on, Las Vegas and the Octagon, and, you want the sport to be represented in the best way possible, and up until the very end of the fight, I thought it was, and then that happens. But now, 48 hours later, no one was seriously hurt, no one was arrested. You start to think to yourself, well, this thing, is really a 6-month build. From what happened in Brooklyn to, all the trash talk and family being talked about and religion being talked about and the kind of letting Conor do what he does, there's no way that you could be surprised that this happened. And I can guarantee you, regardless of what they're saying about it now, if they do the rematch, which I believe at some point they will do the rematch, this footage will be used time and again.
1,000%.
So I'm not really buying, the whole this was a horrible thing.
The one thing I said, we were watching the pay-per-view at my house, and someone said, well, doesn't Khabib understand that, you're selling the fight and you're trash talking? I'm like, no, he's Russian. It's just different. It's just different, and he's Muslim, and it's religion, and it's a cultural thing. And he held it in so tightly, right? Like even at the pre-fight press conferences, you said it to us on our TV show. You got a little more out of Khabib in the press conference where he was by himself. But when he was with Conor, he's just not going to engage him that way. That's just not who he is. But when it was all over, you just saw that rage come out. Like when he submitted him, usually guys are just celebrating. They're not sort of, getting in the other guy's face that they just submitted because there's sort of a code about that. But it just wasn't that way with Khabib.
I thought he was not ever going to let go. I thought he was just going to choke him out until he was completely out.
Yeah, I was actually surprised that he showed that kind of restraint, and then you saw him say something to Conor, and then, of course, everything ensued. But no, look, I am not of Muslim descent. I'm Jewish, but I do think that there are a lot of similarities between the two religions. Of course, there's a long history there. And so I understand why Khabib feels the way he does. Khabib still lives at home with his parents. He has 2 children. He is married. He still that's the culture. The youngest child in the family lives at home, and his dad. He speaks about his dad in the most glowing way. I mean, he is everything to Khabib, his father. And when this thing started to turn towards that territory, family, religion, stuff like that, I knew that Khabib would not react, the way he typically reacts, which he's unflappable, he's stoic. Even telling me a week before the fight that this is personal, that is a surprise for Khabib to say. And so that's why I think we shouldn't be surprised. And that's why I think the UFC does deserve some credit. They were prepared for this. They did everything they could do to stop something like this from really spilling over. I think they were lucky that the crowd was predominantly pro-Conor. I think if it was like a 50-50 type of crowd, this thing could have turned into a major brawl in the stands, like that Bo Galata fight.
Yep.
But the problem was when he jumped out of the cage, everyone forgot about Conor, and that left him open to being attacked. And that's, I understand where Khabib is coming from, and he lost his cool, okay, no harm, no foul, whatever you want to say. But for guys on Khabib's team to light up Conor like that after he was just in a fight, to me, is disgusting.
Yeah.
It shows you the differences in the two camps today. Your colleague and our friend Arash Markazi from ESPN, he tweeted a picture today. He was in the airport leaving Las Vegas the same time as Khabib, and he said maybe 2 people stopped him for a picture because he was just by himself. If that was Conor going through the airport, there would be hundreds of people. It's just, you could not get 2 more polar opposites.
Yes, but I will say, and I tweeted this video from a journalist in Russia. Khabib is now back home in Dagestan, and he filled a soccer stadium that holds around 20,000 people for this homecoming ceremony that they did for him. And there's footage of the people rushing towards him. He is a megastar back home in Dagestan and Russia.
Well, Putin called him, didn't he?
Yeah, Putin, and that's interesting in its own right because Vladimir Putin invited Conor to attend the World Cup on his behalf, and he took a picture with him in the World Cup final in Russia, and he took a picture with Putin, and Khabib was at the game as well and did not take a picture with him. And without getting too deep into it, and I've learned a lot more about it in the build-up to this fight, but the relationship between Vladimir Putin and the Dagestani people is not good. And that's being kind. And so people thought that this was a calculated move on Conor's part to sort of stick it to Khabib. And so for Khabib to then get the call and to be praised by Putin, and that's why he mentioned it. He said, I heard the media saying a lot of things about, Putin taking a picture with him. Well, he just called me. I thought, that was a big moment for him and shows just how deeply personal this fight was.
How much did the UFC need this high profile of a pay-per-view, in your opinion? Because for Dan and I, we thought that the UFC really did need it. We hadn't been too engaged in the UFC, to be honest, since the Cormier-Stipe pay-per-view. Do you think, am I overstating that, Ariel, or do you think the UFC needed something like this?
No, absolutely. I mean, it's imperative that they have Conor back, coming off a win or coming off a loss. He's the biggest star in the history of the sport. He's in my opinion, top 10 most famous athletes in the world right now. And so they really need, even if it's him fighting once a year, they need him. And to not have him fight for 2 years, almost 23 months to be exact, is a blow to them. Now, they made a lot of money off of the Mayweather fight. There's no doubt about that. But for the brand, and to have him on a card, and then you can highlight other fighters on that card as well and try to make stars. Derrick Lewis is a perfect example of that. He gained 600,000 followers on Instagram just based off of his performance and his post-fight interview. That's what they need. And so, I couldn't agree more. I mean, since the sale of the company, there have been, few and far between nights like we had on Saturday. And so that's why if you think that these guys are going to be reprimanded, if they're going to get stripped, it's not going to happen. I appreciate that they have to say those things, but one thing that drives me nuts is when people try to compare Dana White to Gary Bettman or Roger Goodell or Adam Silver. He is not the commissioner of the sport. He is not even the commissioner of the UFC. He is an owner. And an owner is going to always side with his biggest stars. He is not in the business of trying to take those guys off of the roster and trying to reprimand them. So people need to stop thinking that he is some commissioner who's there to bring down justice on these people, like when David Stern suspended Ron Artest for 73 games. It's just not going to happen.
So if they schedule a rematch between Conor and Khabib, does Dana have to deal with an uprising within the UFC?
No, I don't think so. I think
people will understand?
Yeah, everyone knows the score. I mean, I think it's a bit of a tough sell if they do it immediately, but honestly, nothing would surprise me with the UFC these days. I mean, I think the UFC, they're kind of finding their way, and they go through ups and downs, and it's a cyclical sport, as are all combat sports. People say one day boxing is dead, and then boxing is on fire. So, they one of the unspoken things, I guess you could put it, is, they have a massive loan with a lot of interest, and they sold the company for $4.025 billion, and it wasn't all cash, if you get what I'm saying. So they have to do what's best for business, and they have to do what makes them the most money. That being said, I do think it might be a little soon to do it right away. And, of course, we have to find out what happens with Nevada. Nevada could, issue some kind of suspension/fine on Khabib. But I have no doubt at some point down the line, Conor gets what he wants, and he wants the rematch. And I have no doubt that they're going to oblige at some point.
Watching the fight, though, and people talked about this, stylistic nightmare for Conor. Everything that people said Khabib was going to be able to do it to him, he did to him, even to the point, Ariel, where he was standing up with him in the center of the octagon and trading blows with him. And you heard John Anik and Joe and those guys say, what's he doing? Well, it didn't seem to affect him. He seemed to be fine trading blows with him. So, do you think Conor can actually beat this guy?
I think a lot of people, including my colleague Chael Sonnen, who you guys may remember, thought that Conor did better than expected. And I would, to a degree, agree with those people, considering the layoff, considering the fact that Khabib's strengths are Conor's weaknesses, and those are wrestling and his cardio. But at the end of the day, I had it, 3 rounds to 1. If we're going to include the 4th round as one of those rounds, I thought Conor won the 3rd very, very, very closely. That's notable because Khabib in the UFC has never lost a round, so that's the first time that he's ever lost a round. But yeah, you're 100% right. He stood in there, he took his shots, and he was giving them back. And in fact, he dropped Conor ever so briefly with strikes on the feet. So I thought it was a flawless performance by Khabib, and in the end, Conor has won some fights before fights with his trash talk, with his mental warfare, most notably against the likes of Jose Aldo and Eddie Alvarez. Those guys were done before the fight started. In this case, now looking back, we were wondering how would he respond to all of this. It's very clear that Khabib responded positively, that this lit a fire under him and that he brought his A game. He's 27-0 now, so he's a legit fighter. I would argue he's top 2, top 3 best fighters in the world, period, and on his way to being the best lightweight of all time. But he certainly rose to the occasion, and that's very notable because he's never been on a stage like that before.
Now, I know there wasn't a knockout in the Conor fight, but in all the prelims, did they set a record for amount of knockouts?
No, they didn't, but it was, like I said, as far as finishes and whatnot, it was up there. I don't think that they set a knockout. There's a couple of cards that come to mind that I know had more, but it was, like I said, one of those nights where the eyes of the sports world, at least, are watching. And, this was a card that was actually somewhat maligned because people thought that they should put bigger names on the card. Well, the reason they didn't put bigger names on the card is because big names cost a lot of money, and it costs a hell of a lot of money to have Conor on the card. So you need to be able to be strategic with how you divide that money. But they were strategic in putting the right kind of fighters, exciting fighters, young fighters, people that they want to invest in and give this platform to. And I thought for the most part, the majority of them rose to the occasion. So that was really cool to see. And I think that there are some people now that if you watch that fight, the whole card on Saturday, you're like, oh, I want to see that person as well. That's always been the brilliance of the UFC. It's not just about the main event. They try to hook you with the main event, but really, they want you to see everyone else so that they can build future stars. And up until the melee, I thought it was a phenomenal night for the sport.
I know we're keeping you longer than I promised, but I have to ask you, continuing with that theme, Ariel, Karate Hottie does great, Derrick Lewis wins, that's all good, but Tony Ferguson, my God, this guy, I'm just watching him, I'm like, he's relentless. This guy's incredible. Does he ever get tired? How is he not a bigger star? And as you pointed out, obviously they want him to be a bigger star, and it couldn't have worked out better for him. Unfortunate way that ended, because it was such a great fight. And you got to love how tough Pettis is. But, man, that was fantastic to watch how relentless that guy is.
Yeah, he's an incredible fighter. He has an 11-fight winning streak right now. It's active. And his story is somewhat tragic in the sense that someone with a winning streak that long and they haven't fought for a belt yet, I mean, that's just absurd. But he's been saddled with some bad luck because Conor has been in his division and he hasn't been very active, and then they had to move on, and he actually got an interim title fight back in October of last year and won the belt. So all's well and good. He finally gets that gold around his waist, but it was the interim belt, so it wasn't the official title, but still it helps him get more money. Then he's booked to fight Khabib in this great fight that they've tried to book a couple of times before, and the fight fell through for various reasons, injuries on both sides of the equation. And we're finally there. Everyone can't wait for the fight. A week before the fight, he's at Fox, your former home in LA, and he trips over a camera cord, and tears his MCL. Literally a week before the fight, he's out there promoting the fight, trips over a cord, tears his knee, and is out of the fight on a week's notice. And then gets surgery, comes back in 5 months and does what he did on Saturday, but he doesn't have the belt. They stripped him of that title, which I thought was unfair. Doesn't have the belt. And so now he has to work his way back up, and he's back being the number one contender. So I hope him being on that card in the co-main event, that's why I said it's a little premature for the rematch. I hope he gets Khabib and they do that fight once and for all.
The amount of blood in that fight
great.
was graphic.
It was.
It was incredible. It was an amazing fight by both guys, I thought. I really thought they both brought it, and they had an opportunity to, I think Anthony kind of came away as a bigger star as well, even though he lost.
Max Holloway, before we let you go, where do we stand with Max? How's he doing? He's about to be in another pay-per-view up here in Canada.
Yes, December 8th, to be exact, in Toronto at the Scotiabank Centre, I believe it's called now, right?
Yeah,
that's right.
That's it.
It's good to have him back. It was very worrisome what happened to him. In case your listeners don't know, he was supposed to fight in July on the same card as Cormier and Miocic on July 7th, I do believe, to be exact, and he was pulled from the card just like 3-4 days prior due to what they called concussion-like symptoms, but they did a bunch of tests, and they couldn't find what was wrong with him. He was slurring his words. Very scary stuff. He's had a very tough year. In fact, he was the guy who they tapped to replace Tony Ferguson on a week's notice against Khabib in April, and he missed weight. And so he hasn't fought yet this year after coming off one of the best years of his career last year. So I'm looking forward to having him back. That fight against Brian Ortega is tremendous. Hope it stays intact. They had a co-main event fight on that card as well, Joanna Jacek against Valentina Shevchenko for the 125 title, but they canceled it to try to salvage the New York card coming up in November, so I feel bad for the Canadian fans and the Toronto fans in particular. But your Maple Leafs are doing so well, I don't feel so bad because it seems like everything's, as far as what's most important to you Torontonians is going well.
Well, what about your Habs? They look, everyone underestimated your Habs. They look pretty good to start the season.
Nah, they do this from time to time. It'll be like a good November, a good December. And then, they're doing a fantastic job of wasting Carey Price's prime years away. I mean, it's just phenomenal. It's great.
I don't know. I don't know about that. Hey, listen, Bergevin looks like he's totally in control in between. He looks like he could fight in the UFC right now. He's so jacked.
The only person who has pecs more impressive than Mark Bergevin. You know what I'm going to say, right?
Yeah.
Am I allowed to say this? Because I noticed they got cut off from the interview. Is this taboo, what I'm about to say?
No, not at all.
The interview went too long.
We blame producer Tim for all these things.
Well, I just have to say, Darren Detition has one of the all-time great physiques that I've ever seen in my life. First of all, a gem of a human being, smiling, just so happy to be there, a real joie de vivre. And I've only met him twice. Once at Mayweather-McGregor, once at this fight, and I have to say it was like seeing an old friend from high school. So happy, smile on his face, just thrilled to be there. But he is just busting out of that suit, and it's all muscle. I mean, it's so impressive. He tells me he's 50 years old, I think, and like 3 kids who are in their 20s. The guy looks like he's 25. I can't believe it. You said Mark Bergevin looks like he's in control. I've never heard those two words.
No. He looks like he looks jacked. Like I think he's forgotten about the team and he's just in the Gold's Gym in Old Montreal or something like that.
Good for him.
Yeah, I guess so. Listen, Ariel, this has been awesome.
We really appreciate it, buddy.
Anytime. I love you guys, and it's such an honor to be on your show. I didn't even I was working so much in Vegas. I forgot to tell my friends, and back home in Montreal, and I got so many texts. Like I do all this stuff for ESPN. No one cares back home. I'm on your show, and they're like, "Oh my God, you're on Jay and Dan. We saw you singing, reunited." Like, wow, I should just move back home to Montreal or Toronto, and then people will actually care about what I do.
Well, why don't you do that? I mean, you can come work here. We've got tons of studio space. Everyone moved down to Much Music, so we got lots of room up here for you.
Is this an offer?
Oh yeah, big time. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I don't have money to pay you, but bring the family up, free healthcare up here, so that's something.
You're enticing me. My wife tries to get me to move back home every day, to be honest. So
well, listen,
I'll let her know what your offer is, and then we'll take it from there.
And we'll see you at the fight in December.
Oh yes. yes, absolutely, 100%.
Ariel, this has been awesome. Enjoy those day-old nachos, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you very much, guys.
Take
Anytime.
care. Ariel Helwani, what a guy.
What a
Great
legend.
Canadian. A great Canadian, indeed.